Welcome back, everybody. This is me trying to record this video again because I just got a call that was important. The good news is I'll probably have proper beer relatively soon. The bad news is not for this video. We're here to talk about Blood and Bone by Ian Cameron Esselman, and yes, I managed, hopefully will manage, to record 2 videos on this in like consecutive days. Who'd thought it? Anyway, chapters 5 and 6 today, if I stay sane for the rest of the video, because times are crazy, so am I, and, well, Riddle of Steel, the Epic Metal Festival is coming closer, and we're currently racing the COVID cases to a finishing line. We'll see if there's a lockdown and we have to cancel or not. Who knows? If you want to know more about the festival stuff, I might do a video on it. Let me know if that's something you're interested in. But now let's go and do some blood and boning, or something like that. Cheers. All right. So, let's start with an inconsistency, because I found one. And since I usually suck at lore and all that stuff, I have to parade them around, and then you can all tell me why I'm still wrong and an idiot. Which, you know, is fair. So, the inconsistency is that here in Chapter 4, when everyone's favorite enchantress, Therese, meets upon the twins of chance, and calls them the Get of the Errant. Now, you and me we all know that this is not true, because we read Stephen Erickson's Dust of Dreams and The Crippled God, right? And there, it's very clearly stated that they are children of sexual laugh. So who's right? Cam Esselman or Stephen Erickson? I don't know. I doubt they know. Possibly, I would say Cam Esselman, because he seems to keep more notes of stuff, but on the other hand, who cares, right? We're still talking, I mean, unless they're children of both, which is a possibility that I will absolutely entertain, because we're talking gods here, we're talking elder gods here, we're talking fucking Azathanai. They can do whatever the fuck they want. So maybe that's that. But now, let's go to actually, you know, things to talk about. So let's talk about nature and why we hate it, or why at least Master Golan hates it so much. The answer, he's fascist, but that's neither here nor there. So, what do I mean? We have at the beginning of Chapter 4, we have that long discussion, like, well, inner monologue of Master Golan when he's frustrated by how, you know, everything is going downhill further and further and further. You know, the carts are breaking apart, they're carrying their own firewood. We see all the troubles that people have when trying to actually run a military campaign in a jungle, which, you know, it's not made for military campaigns. If you read, like, the diaries of people who tried that shit before, especially when they pretended to be civilized people, didn't work out that well. And Master Golan is finding out that that is the case. And then he has some interesting ideas about how this whole jungle is just one big mess, and that caring for the land, and by caring we mean the very much biblical one of, like, making it your own, tearing it apart, and rebuilding it to whatever whims you have, possibly damaging all the ecosystems and so forth, gives you ownership. And having land that is just like landing it on does not have any owners, and if people live in there and are not landing it on, then they don't deserve that land, and that gives you the right to just go and take the thing and burn it down and chop it down and graze all your cattle to turn it into beef for burgers and sell it to the Americas. No, that's, well, that's technically the same mindset is what I'm trying to say here. Thaumaturgs are apparently not big into burger fast food chains, but who knows, they're still, the mindset is the same. And the interesting aspect about that, apart from it having that, like, ring to it, the interesting thing is that Golan says, like, he's trying to do all of this, but he's not even deserving a medal for it, because medals, it's his public duty to do this. And this is where we tread very close to your really hardcore Nazi territory, right? Just saying. My point is the idea that you're doing a public service and you're just doing it for good intentions and not for power, money, fame, or any of these other like things is very much the thing that you see with the really bad guys. And the terrible thing here is that we know that this is not what he's claiming to do, but he's actually believing that that is the case. They're trying to build a better world, whether the world wants it or not, and they're going to make sure that world will be safe and clean and well organized, and no one that is not, fully worth living in that world will live in that world. So fucking fascists. Thaumaturgs. Anyway, that's just like my thoughts on that matter. I found it interesting to have that whole idea of that ownership comes through actually doing something with the land and not with just living there, which is a concern, to be fair, that we have seen before. Like, what is land ownership is a question that is, for example, asked in parts of Fall of Light by Stephen Erickson. It comes up again and again, and obviously the reason why this is the case is that it's a thing that we have dealt with in our world a lot, right? Like going somewhere, taking the land away from the people that live there because you claim they're not doing anything with it is very popular up to this day. So yeah, seeing that same mindset there is once again one of those reasons why the Malazan world is so much a mirror of our own world, even though it's super strange and weird. And, that's pretty cool. So, what else do we have? A very interesting, long discussion, or not discussion, like interesting idea about relationships between deities and stuff like that, with Cyan and Old Man Moon, who gets his arse tattooed, which is, pretty cool. Old Man Moon gets his arse tattooed and talks about how that being that he is connected to the moon in a lot of ways. And then we have a discussion, which is an interesting one, on a lot of levels, about ascribing gender to heavenly bodies, and how in a lot of places the moon is thought as female and the sun is thought of male, or the other way round. And Old Man Moon's claim that in really old societies the sun is female and the moon is male, because the sun is the instrument of procreation, or of creation in general, of growth and health, all of those good things, which, makes sense to link that to the female, and the male is just, loitering about and basking in all the hard work of the woman, which, to be fair, is not far off the mark in general societal ways. And now, I'm not an anthropologist. I try not to be. But having that whole idea of connecting, like, the moon to the female, to the female gender through like the cycles and all that makes us, I get why people do that, but there is certainly that idea of having the sun being female. And in, for example, in German, because we do attach genders to all kinds of stuff in our language, it is exactly that way around. Like in German, the sun is female and the moon is male. So for me, that was like an interesting conversation, just for like from that linguistic standpoint, but also because of like what is connected to it. And the other interesting part that we have there is the idea that the discussion they're having on how the moon is connected to showing that like the old dies and the new takes over, which Cyan thinks is super harsh, but Old Man Moon claims to be the way of the world in general, that old things pass and die and new things take over. And I think this is a very important discussion that they're having there, an important argument, so to speak, because it connects very much to that overall theme that I've spoken about so often in the Malazan world, the idea of progress and the melancholy of the old fading away, whether it's the Rivi in Orb Scepter Throne, or it is the Barghast in Memories of Ice, or later on, or it is the way the Talan Imas or the Imas were hunted out and almost extinct, exterminated by humans, how cultures fail and so forth. It is sort of the sad side, or the very like bare bones side of progress in general, is that all things pass away and die. Um, yeah, there's that, and we kind of get that connection that I spoke about with Ardata's realm, Himatan, which we are in now, being exactly that kind of place, that refugium for all refugium. I think that's how to pronounce it. A refugium. Let's anglicize all our Latin, right? Point is, it's a refuge for all those things that are like have no further retreat because they're sort of taken over by a more aggressive species, that being humanity. And which is why you have all those crazy things hanging out in Imotan. So, and this is an interesting discussion to be had, because what it basically means is that we have some being with the power to create a place where those things can still survive on their own terms. Because it's not yet a zoo or a theme park. It is very much not that. It's actually a still working part of the world where these beings can be free. Now that's what I think is like the interesting aspect of this one, is like, it is a piece of like forgotten world, so to speak, left somewhere in the impassable tracts of the world where no one can get to, and that's where all these people hang out and are themselves. But it's not, and this is the important bit, it is not made by humans to keep all those things and look at, like we as humans build zoos and national parks and whatnot, but it is made by one of them that still has the power to keep that thing going. So we come to that question of agency, because it takes away agency if we do it. I mean, on the other hand, better that than nothing, at least I think so in a lot of cases, but there's an argument to be had there that I am not willing to do today while I'm kind of running on adrenaline overdrive. That's what I'm trying to say here. So, what else is interesting? Jack and his ambush. Now that's a really interesting story. So we've learned about. That's what I like about the Malazan world. One of the things. Well, we learned about it because we've so far only had Jack's perspective. Is that, all those Taumaturgs are pampered arseholes that lord it over the rest of the world, and Jack is fighting them because he's been disenfranchised, and so on. True. But now we also get that underling, Ponchon, is that his name? I don't know. That guy, as perspective, an inner monologue. So we learn about how he is like chosen through merit, so to speak, raised in that strict hierarchy into all kinds of places, which, even though it claims to be a meritocracy, is still very much prone to the trepidations of nepotism and abuse of power. And, well, we kind of get a hint that there's a lot of sexual abuse going on. Are there parallels to the Catholic Church? Possibly. Are those parallels to any other form of power structure that includes the raising of children? Definitely. And to see that perspective of someone like him growing up in that power structure kind of makes clear that both of those dudes, Jack and the guy whose name I have forgotten, both have very much distorted views of the other. Remember what I said about like this book being very much about othering and the other? It's like, it is unfortunately a thing that we as humans, as I said yesterday, tend to do. And yeah, it goes both ways. You can't, in that kind of situation, rarely say you're the good guy, because you're othered by those guys who are the bad guys. Those situations obviously happen when there is like a power dynamic. But it's important to understand that it goes all possible ways, and that's what we can see in that situation. And yeah, so that's what I wanted to say about that part. Plus, obviously, the undead stone curse thing is just really cool and a really cool set piece, and I do really like the way it is played out in that ghost castle. It's one of those bits of the Malazan world, whether it's novels of the Malazan Empire or any of the other parts, where you can just see how that scene was played in a role-playing game. It feels like that, with all the, it's cinematic, it has the horror element, it has the guy mouthing off, only some people surviving. Works perfectly. So that's something that I liked very much about it. So, what else should we talk about? I think we need to talk about, for a moment, about what is going on with Skinner and his gang. I personally appreciate something that's, and this is very interesting in a grander scheme, or it just made sense in my head a second ago, so bear with me while I'm trying to bring this together. So, we once again have Skinner and gang on a stranded, broken Macross city, or the rest of the remains of Macross city. Mara, Petal, and Skinner, and we have all of this through and the priest of the crippled god, and we have all of that through Mara's perspective. And this, I feel, is where we're going to go in a second. Mara's perspective on the whole thing, we have the cool automaton that is powered by a piece of the fallen of the shattered god, which is called you remember I think it's Deadhouse Landing, possibly, where Calor comes to a different city and they meet one of those automatons. So apparently Macross City, and I do so wish we would get more Macross action in one of the coming Malazan books. Just saying, if either Steven Erikson or Cam Hasselmont are watching this, guys, we need Macross stuff. Point is, however, they do seem to have steampunk-like robot warriors defending them. And if that's not fucking cool, I don't know what is. Floating cities with robot guardians. This is straight up anime-style levels of weird coolness. Anyway, says the person who doesn't watch anime. Anyway, my point is, we have that situation. It's all been warped by the power of the crippled god, and it's interesting to see how basically the influence of the crippled god can be likened to radioactive poisoning and radiation poisoning, basically. And it makes things warp and metamorphose, so they're getting attacked by crab monsters, which are super scary because, they're humanoid crabs, basically. And H.P. Lovecraft is probably still shitting himself in his coffin at this point because he's scared of fish monsters. However, I don't know. However, that's just part of it. It's interesting because he finally calls the crippled god, well, he doesn't call him Kamen Sod, he calls him some garbled version of it. Which kind of makes sense because the fallen king, the demon king, or whatever his name is called Kelvor, the High King. And we kind of know that his name is Calor, right? And so Kamen Sod is, in this case, the fallen crippled god is, in this case, Kazim Sod or something like that. I don't know. Never mind, we know who the guy is. Skinner does Skinner things and finally defeats him, but we see all of that through Mara, who is apparently very much have a crush on Skinner. Does she have a crush on him because she's attracted to power, as Silk opined in the Path to Ascendancy? I don't know. Maybe she just genuinely loves the guy and is pissed off by the fact that he doesn't care. And is just attracted to power itself. And but it's interesting to see how, because Mara is always treating Petal like shit, and you have all of that stuff, and she comes across as very, very unlikable. But having her in a view on the whole thing in this one, that she's just trying to get Skinner's attention, and he just doesn't care, or flat out actually humiliates her, and probably doesn't care because he's Skinner, but is an interest, adds dimension to it, and kind of shows where her frustration comes from. Now, is it cool and clever to say a woman is basically a bitch because she's ignored by the man. Not necessarily, but in the overall picture, it is certainly something that I like. In the overall Malazan world, this doesn't, invalidate any of the stuff that's happening in the Malazan world. But it kind of shows, like, at least made me feel sympathetic to Mara because, yeah, being in that situation sucks, no matter the genders involved. And but once again, the idea there is it the power or not? The love for power, the ambition, because Mara is ambitious, right? Is where I'm saying that in a way, the relation or non-relation of Mara to Skinner mirrors, in a way, the relation that is slowly evolving with Prince Jatal and Princess Adwani. I still suck at pronouncing her name. That girl, the princess, I think it's Adwani or something like that. I'll learn it at some point. Anyway, her, because in that situation, she is very much of the driving force, and he is just sort of following. And she's very much attracted to power, mostly, and Jatal is sort of the shy, well, not shy, but slow and methodical, thinking, careful, over careful, who knows, kind of person who's slowly losing himself to that reckless lust for power. Because I guess, that's an interesting dynamic that we have there. And we're going to talk more about those two and like all the stuff that's happening in that area later on. But that's an interesting dynamic there, because you have two people that are both elite. They're both like very much privileged people in power, but they have like very different personalities. One of them is more intuitive, driven, certainly, definitely intuitive, certainly ambitious as hell. You have one person who is very careful, very traditional in their thoughts, in their like way of doing things, and they are attracted to one another. At least one of them is attracted to the other, because if you're coming from the more like careful side of things, I guess, recklessness can be highly attractive, which is why I love myself so much, because I'm a pretty reckless person at this point, but I'm also very careful. I'm always afraid, is what I'm trying to say here. Anyway, jokes aside, it's an interesting dynamic that we're having there, and it's still far from fully developed. It's just more that we only see it through Jatal's eyes, which makes it a bit more, well, he's, trying to be all like honorable and careful and whatnot, so who knows? But yeah, that's what I'm trying to say here, which it doesn't make that much sense, I guess. But anyway, my argument there is, once again, that we have that like inverted dynamic there, because one is attracted to the other, and the other person is attracted to power mostly. And yeah, we'll see how those two relationships will continue to mirror each other or not. Well, one of those groups is at least getting it on, so there's that, So let's look a bit at the overall part of the Adwani and Andaniai. That's her name. Fucking hell. And finally, I remembered it. Okay, Princess Andaniai. That's her. Okay, so the Adwani are storming the southern capital of the Thaumaturgs, and it all goes wrong from there. So there's a bunch of things that I find interesting here. One of them is the observation of architecture as an expression of a mindset of a culture. I mean, that's obviously true, and it's not exactly big news to most of you, or most of us, I think. So why do I bring it up? Well, I still think it's interesting to talk about that, right? The idea that the way we build kind of is part of our culture, and that one of the Thaumaturgs, as Jatal notices, is very much turned inside. They don't care about the outside. They don't care about their bodies. They're more like about spirits. We learned a lot about their like physical like control of their bodies today, which is fairly impressive stuff. But yeah, it's very much about the spirit, about the inside, and having that in the way their buildings are constructed. Having that put into a fantasy novel is just like, it's pretty cool because it kind of shows that architecture is more than just like piling rocks on one another. All right, so let's look at two things there, like before we actually end it for today. The conflict between the Shadowams, those like terrible priests of decay and whatnot, and the Taumaturgs. That leads to this whole situation where the Taumaturgs are slaughtered in the most gruesome and gruesomely described way. And thus the conflict is put to the next level. Obviously, we kind of know that Calor has kind of made that pact or whatever deal with the Shadowams, so they wreak this havoc. So the rest of the army has to run with him and take down the rest of the Taumaturgs' kingdom. Is the word I was looking for. So we kind of know that. The interesting thing, though, is that the Shadowam, that what Jatal says, that the Shadowams and the Taumaturgs are basically following sort of the same philosophy, kinda, but like maybe opposite sides. And the argument that said priest then makes and says, like, the closer you are in your thoughts or in your philosophy, in your school of thought, the closer, like the larger the hatred, the bigger the rivalry. And that is obviously true. That is obviously something that we have in our world as well. If you have like no common ground whatsoever, you don't need to actually really hate the other person. It's once again that idea of othering. It's like othering gone too far in this case, because it's like it's a conscious approach of othering, because you're basically the same kind of thing. So you need to artificially raise these walls, make someone the other, which is what we tend to do with people that we then start to hate, because basically fundamentally we're pretty much the same all the time. So having that aspect in there, I feel, is an important point that is made there, and I do like that part. Apart from that, well, that longbows are actually pretty fucking powerful. It's something we tend to forget, that yes, you have like really long arrows and shit, you can drive that stuff through, well, in this case, a Yakshaka armor. So there's also that. I think that's more or less all. As I said, there's a lot of action in this one, and the more action there is, the less there's actually, interest, philosophy and whatnot to talk about. So, I don't know. Very little of like our crew in the jungle over there with Shimmer and Kaz and so going on, but they're still on their dreamlike thing. And I think that's like the final thing is like that the way the Forest of Himatan is very much fogging everyone's brain. Everyone is just like slowing down. You blur the world, like you blur the line between reality and perception and fantasy or fever dream. That's sort of what I really, really appreciate about Blood and Bone, is that it does that oh so well. Right, yeah, of course, we have that whole like fucking insect attack that I kind of forgot to talk about. Well, it's probably possibly artificial or like organized, orchestrated by someone, who knows, but it certainly, shows once again how fucking deadly this kind of jungle is, and how, yes, brutal as is. And I guess the final thing is, once again, because we always have parallels and mirrors in these kind of books, is how the trip of the Adwani and Calor's gang mirrors the trip of the Taumaturgs, of Golan's crew, with the Disavowed, because it's like, at the end of the day, they'll find out that maybe they had weird notions about who's actually in charge, or who actually knows what is happening, and who's actually planning stuff, and who's just following along. And it feels like they're slowly about to find out. How long will it take for them to actually find out? I guess we'll find out. On Monday, maybe. We'll see how I continue with this. Anyway, thanks again for watching and all of that. I'll talk to you maybe tomorrow. We'll see. And until then, cheers.